Hi, welcome back to Health Crash TV, your guide to reclaiming feeling young, sexy and sane. I'm Claire and this is part 1 of our 6 videos in the series. What I'd like you to do is look at each video and find out, ask yourself what could be contributing to your sugar cravings. Our first topic is blood sugar imbalance. And that sounds pretty obvious, but it's kind of misunderstood as to what that is. Put quite simply, your body, your brain is always trying to maintain some homeostasis in the body. And so it's always trying to regulate how much sugar is in the blood at any one time. And it does that by monitoring how much there is and then sending messages either to your liver or to your pancreas or to your brain to go out and get more sugar to try to balance the sugar in your blood. So when I was school age, so 11 to 14, I would walk home from secondary school and I would come through the door, and the first thing that I could think of was going to the kitchen cupboard and getting something sweet. My energy was low, I was kind of a bit jittery and a bit shaky, and I had a sugar craving. There was nothing that could satisfy that sugar craving. And so I would go to the cupboards, and my mum used to get in these packets of Viscount biscuits. So I don't know if you remember them, they were like a biscuit and they had a bit of mint or a bit of orange stuff on the top, and then they were coated in chocolate. And I would start off and eat one and I would eat the entire packet. And I look back on that now, and I was having a cereal for breakfast in the morning, and then I was having a sandwich at lunchtime, and then I was coming home in the afternoon. And knowing what I know now about what foods I need to help to balance my blood sugar and keep me at my optimal energy and my optimal focus, my diet for me at that age was completely wrong. And by the time I was coming in, after I'd been mentally using my brain at school, and I'd walked all the way home, I'd had carbohydrate-rich breakfast, a carbohydrate-rich lunch, and I was just desperate for sugar by the time I got in, and I would overeat. So it wasn't a lack of willpower, it is that my body was really low in sugar, and my brain was saying, we need some more sugar, because we're low in energy. So your brain predominantly uses glucose as an energy source, and your brain is always monitoring the amount of sugar in your blood to try to regulate its levels. So if the levels dip, your body's going to do something, and it's very stressful to the body to try to want to raise your blood sugar levels up. So the first thing that it does is give you sugar cravings so that you go off and have some sugar. Now, what often happens when you have too much sugar is that then your body has to release insulin to pack that sugar away into the cells. And it often overdoes it. So if your blood sugar spikes very suddenly, then your body will produce a lot of insulin, and that insulin will pack away more sugar than it really needed to. And that drops your blood sugar again. So this is where you get this cycle of having sugar craving and then eating loads of sugar and it feeling okay and better for a bit. And then the sugar craving comes back, maybe even stronger after you've eaten something sweet. Alongside of that, the liver is producing a hormone which helps to release sugar from the liver into the bloodstream when your blood sugar goes low. So you've got these very important organs with other jobs to do in the body, constantly firefighting and trying to regulate sugar in the body. So blood sugar imbalance is essential for our system to work optimally so that we've got a good level of brain function and a good level of energy. But also, we don't really want to use those organs and have them buffer all the time just to manage our blood sugar, because we're not managing ourselves by keeping our schedule and our diet in line. And this kind of assault on the body is what leads to a progression of some form of diabetes. So over time, even if you had chronically low blood sugar, that response of the cell to the insulin is going to blunt, and that's how you get the insulin resistance. So when you get insulin resistance, that means the insulin can no longer pack the sugar away in the cells, and you get chronically elevating blood sugar, and your body can't do anything about it. And one of the reasons blood sugar is so important to regulate is that sugar is really toxic. So if we have a high level of sugar in our system, it damages stuff. So rather than handicapping the body and then having to go on metformin and then having to go do all of the medical interventions, what we want to do is prevent it. Apart from the whole kind of, we don't want sugar cravings and we want to have good energy and we want to just feel at our best anyway, that's short term, but long term you're preventing the onset of a chronic disease. So there are a few things to look at with this. So here are 4 possible reasons why your blood sugar could be imbalanced. Number 1, you're eating the wrong ratios at your meal times. So your proportions of protein, fat, and carbohydrate aren't right for you. Number 2, your caffeine intake is too high. So caffeine is a stress response and it also dehydrates you and it creates a blood sugar release. So whenever you have a fight or flight response and you're going to fight a bear, which is what the fight or flight response is kind of geared up for us to be able to do from an evolutionary perspective, that release of blood sugar increases our blood sugar. So then you get the insulin cycle all over again. Number 3 is food intolerances. And food intolerances is another big reason why we can't regulate. And it's a similar reason to the caffeine. When we eat a food that's inflammatory and our body has an immune response to it, our body also has a stress response to it. So we have inflammation, we have a release of cortisol, a release of stress hormones, and that sets off that imbalance and that fluctuating cycle that our body's trying to contend with, and ultimately sugar cravings. And number 4 is changes in the weather. And I'll come back to that because it ties in with ratios. So I'm going to give you a solution for each of those 4. So number 1, my big passionate phrase for all of your health building is self-calibration. And really what that means is that nobody else can tell you what best suits you. The only way of finding out what best suits you is to experiment with some different alternatives and find out which one you thrive on, which one suits you, which one regulates you. And that can change over time. So if you're looking at your meal, so my breakfast when I was a kid was cereal in the morning, a sandwich at lunchtime. So that was very much a lot of grains, a lot of starchy carbohydrates, and I'm very sensitive to my starchy carbohydrates. So I do much better now if I have something like bacon and avocado for breakfast and a tuna salad for lunch, because the protein and the fat and the vegetables in that suit me in terms of ratios. Whereas if I go back, even if I have a really healthy cereal like a Misa Sunrise, a kind of a flax-based, very ancient grain cereal, it still creates a lot of blood sugar imbalances for me because the GI index, the carbohydrate content is just too high. And this ties in with number 4. So I'm going to just jump down to number 4 because if you think about the type of food that you're attracted to in the summer, it's more the lighter foods, more vegetation, lighter proteins, not as much fat. Whereas in the winter, it's much more likely to be a stew, a hot pot, something that's darker meat, a lot more hearty, maybe higher fat. And you can be doing quite well in the summer, and then as the nights get colder, you might be noticing around about autumn, your sugar cravings get worse. The nights are drawing in, it's a bit colder, and if you don't change your diet to reflect the ratios with the weather changes, that can create more sugar cravings. Number 2 is caffeine, and I explain the reasons why caffeine causes sugar imbalances. And the easiest way to reduce your caffeine consumption is firstly to drink more water, and then secondly to find something which either weans you off the caffeine, so you switch to decaf, or you find a replacement. So I really love white tea. It's got a much lower amount of caffeine in, but it's still got that dryness. I really like the dry tannin-y effect of tea. And then you've got herbal teas, which don't contain caffeine, but you might find the switch over, if you drink a lot of caffeine to no caffeine, too much of a jump. So do that in a graded way. And the final one we're going to deal with is food intolerances. And food intolerances are tricky because you can be intolerant to something like broccoli, you can be intolerant to something like rice. So the top 5 food intolerances are wheat, dairy, egg, corn, and soy. And they're often foods which they've been messed with quite a lot. So the wheat that we have is very, very, it's been commercially refined as a grain, so that it's much further away from spelt, which was a much more ancestral grain, and it's been refined so that it has a much higher content of the inflammatory content like gluten. Dairy is very heavily farmed commercially. The cows that produce it are often unhealthy and on antibiotics, and then we homogenize it and pasteurize it. Egg white for some reason tends to be very reactive with autoimmune conditions. Corn is very often GMO, and the same with soy. If you think that blood sugar imbalance could be a problem for you, so you recognize that pattern of craving, eating, dipping, craving, eating, dipping, if that's something that rings true, take one of these 4 suggestions. So if you don't drink caffeine, great, you've got another 3 suggestions to do. So to recap, have a look at the proportions of protein, fat and carbohydrate that you're having at every meal and experiment with those, self-calibrate, especially as we're getting into the colder months of autumn, and you might find that that is increasing your sugar cravings. Look at your caffeine intake and see if you can switch out some of the caffeine products to some with either less caffeine or no caffeine. And have a go at doing an elimination diet with those food intolerances. Now, as I said, you can be intolerant to anything, so that's maybe something for further exploration, but it gives you something to start with. As part of this series, I'd really love you to be interactive with it. So feedback with the comments below and tell me what you found has worked. If you've got any questions or if you need any clarification about some of the things I've discussed in this video. What I really want you to be able to do is to look at your own life and to look at your own intake of stuff and be able to free yourself from sugar cravings. You know, the biggest message throughout all of this video series is going to be, you're not only freeing yourself from the sugar cravings, but you're freeing yourself from beating yourself up that sugar cravings are a weakness and a lack of self-discipline. Sugar cravings usually have another root cause. Now, if you don't address the root cause, that's maybe something that you need to kind of G yourself up and take responsibility for. But don't beat yourself up for caving. Look at the underlying causes and free yourself from sugar cravings.